The day my brother smiled while accepting a $12.8 million inheritance was the same day I realized my parents had spent my entire life pretending to love us equally. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there inside the polished conference room of a downtown Seattle law office, staring at the leather folder sliding across the table toward my brother while my own chair suddenly felt too small to breathe in. If someone had told me that wasn't the biggest betrayal waiting for me, I would have laughed in their face. I was wrong. My name is Claire Morrison. I'm 38 years old, and until 2 years ago I believed hard work eventually balanced out life's unfairness. I grew up in Bellevue, Washington, in the kind of family everyone envied from the outside. We lived in a beautiful brick house with flower beds my mother obsessively maintained and a father who built one of the largest commercial construction companies in Western Washington. Money was never a problem. Appearances were everything. My father, Richard Morrison, believed reputation was worth more than honesty. My mother, Evelyn, spent decades making sure neighbors, church friends, and business partners believed we were the perfect American family. And for a long time I believed it too. I was 4 years younger than my brother, Ethan. People loved Ethan. He was charming without trying. He knew exactly what people wanted to hear. Teachers adored him. Business clients remembered his jokes. Even when he broke rules, someone else usually took the blame. I was different. Quiet. Organized. Reliable. The child everyone depended on but rarely celebrated. When Dad's company needed summer help, Ethan greeted investors over expensive lunches. I spent my summers organizing invoices in dusty storage rooms. When Grandma became sick, Ethan sent flowers. I drove her to appointments every Thursday for nearly 3 years. No one asked me to. I just couldn't imagine leaving her alone. After college, I became a certified public accountant and eventually opened a small financial consulting practice in Seattle. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. My husband, Daniel, taught high school history, and together we raised our 12-year-old daughter, Lily. We weren't wealthy. We weren't struggling either. We had enough. A comfortable home. Reliable cars. College savings for Lily. Weekend camping trips. Pizza every Friday night. The kind of ordinary happiness you don't appreciate until someone convinces you it isn't enough. Meanwhile, Ethan joined Dad's company. Within 5 years he became executive vice president. At every Thanksgiving dinner, Dad proudly announced Ethan's latest deal while forgetting to ask how my business was doing. I'd smile anyway. Mom would squeeze my hand under the table afterward. "Don't take it personally," she'd whisper. "Your father just understands Ethan's work better." I wanted to believe her. Looking back, I think she wanted to believe herself. Everything changed the winter Dad suffered a massive stroke. The phone rang at 5:30 on a freezing January morning. Mom's voice barely sounded human. "Claire, he's gone." By the time I reached the hospital, Ethan was already talking with administrators about insurance paperwork and private funeral arrangements. He looked devastated. But even through my grief, something felt strangely rehearsed. Within 48 hours he'd already contacted accountants, investment advisors, corporate attorneys, and the board of directors. He had spreadsheets before Dad's funeral was even scheduled. I told myself people mourn differently. Maybe handling paperwork was his way of coping. So I ignored the uneasy feeling twisting inside my stomach. For the next 6 weeks, I practically moved into Mom's house. I handled grocery shopping. Cooked meals. Sorted medical bills. Canceled subscriptions. Answered sympathy cards. Cleaned closets. When Mom couldn't sleep, I'd drive over after work just to sit with her on the back porch until sunrise. Ethan visited too. Usually for 30 minutes. Sometimes an hour. Always dressed in expensive suits because he had important meetings. Mom thanked him constantly. She thanked me too. But it felt different. She thanked Ethan with pride. She thanked me with relief. One afternoon while organizing Dad's office, I noticed several file drawers were almost empty. Dad had always been meticulous. Every tax return. Every property deed. Every investment statement. Everything labeled. Everything indexed. Now entire folders had disappeared. I asked Mom where they went. She hesitated. Oh. Ethan took some business records. When? A few days after the funeral. Did Dad tell him where everything was? I suppose he already knew. Something about her answer bothered me. Dad never let anyone touch his personal files. Not even Mom. Still, grief makes people overlook things they'd normally question. I convinced myself I was overthinking it. Then came the reading of the estate. The conference room overlooked Elliott Bay. Gray clouds hung low over the water as rain streaked across the windows. Our family attorney adjusted his glasses before opening a thick leather binder. I know this has been a difficult time. He reviewed charitable donations, vacation property, retirement accounts, corporate ownership, investment portfolios. Then he reached the section that changed my life. Mr. Morrison's controlling ownership in Morrison Commercial Holdings, valued at approximately $12.8 million, transfers in full to his son, Ethan Morrison. I looked up. Surely there was more. There had to be. Instead, the attorney turned another page. Claire Morrison will receive the contents of the family lake cabin, personal photographs, heirloom furniture specifically designated in Appendix C, and a cash distribution of $25,000. $25,000. I honestly thought I'd misheard him. Not because I expected millions. But because Dad had spent years insisting everything would be divided fairly. Mom wouldn't even look at me. Ethan slowly folded his hands together before saying the words that still echo in my head. I know Dad struggled with this decision. Then he looked directly at me. I hope someday you'll understand. Understand what? That decades of loyalty were apparently worth less than one luxury SUV? I wanted answers. Instead, I walked out before anyone could stop me. Rain soaked through my coat before I reached the parking garage. I sat behind the steering wheel for nearly 20 minutes, unable to start the engine. My phone vibrated. It was Mom. I couldn't answer. Not yet. Because deep down, one question kept repeating itself. For nearly 3 months after the reading of my father's estate, I barely spoke to my mother. I answered her texts with one-word replies. I let most of her calls go to voicemail. Not because I hated her. Because every time I heard her voice, I remembered the way she stared at the conference table instead of looking me in the eyes while my brother accepted everything my father had built. Daniel never pressured me. One evening, while we were washing dinner dishes, he quietly asked, "Do you really believe your dad wanted this?" I dried my hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. I don't know what to believe anymore. You've balanced books for 15 years, he said. You notice details other people miss. If something feels wrong, maybe it deserves another look. His words stayed with me. The next morning, I opened a storage box I'd brought home from my parents' lake cabin. It contained exactly what the attorney had listed: photo albums, old fishing gear, my grandmother's quilt, and several dusty binders no one else had wanted. At first, it felt like reopening a wound. Then I noticed something odd. One binder was labeled Property Taxes, 2016. Inside were newspaper clippings, birthday cards, and an envelope with my father's handwriting. Not unusual. Dad reused folders all the time. But when I opened the envelope, it was empty. The contents had been removed. Someone had taken whatever had once been inside. I stared at the torn flap for several minutes. Why keep the envelope but remove the papers? That question refused to leave my mind. A week later, my mother called again. "Claire, could you come over?" Her voice sounded exhausted. "The furnace quit working, and Ethan says he's too busy. Despite everything, I drove over. The house looked different. Not physically. Emotionally. The flowers were dying. The porch swing creaked in the wind. For the first time in my life, the place felt lonely. While waiting for the repair technician, I wandered into Dad's home office. The bookshelves had been rearranged. Several framed photos were missing. One corner of the room looked strangely empty. What happened here? I asked. Mom looked over from the doorway. Ethan said the room needed updating. When? The week after the funeral. Again. The week after the funeral. The same week the files disappeared. The same week no one was paying attention. That couldn't be a coincidence. I crouched beside the built-in bookshelf. A fresh scratch marked the hardwood floor beneath it, as if the heavy cabinet had recently been pulled away from the wall. Dad never moved that bookshelf. Ever. Curiosity got the better of me. While Mom was in the kitchen making coffee, I gripped the side of the shelf and pulled. It barely budged. But it moved enough. Just enough for something yellowed to peek out from behind it. A large sealed envelope. Covered in dust. My father's handwriting filled the front. Personal. To be kept with my private papers. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. Mom, I called. She walked in carrying 2 mugs. What is it? I held up the envelope. The color drained from her face. I've never seen that before. She sounded sincere. We didn't open it. Not there. Instead, we drove straight to the family attorney's office. He frowned the moment he saw the handwriting. I'll need to examine this carefully. He disappeared into another room. 20 agonizing minutes passed. Finally, he returned. His expression had completely changed. Where exactly did you find this? Behind my father's bookshelf. He slowly removed a pair of reading glasses. This isn't simply another letter. He looked directly at my mother. It's a codicil. Mom blinked. A what? A legally executed amendment to an existing will. The room went silent. He carefully unfolded the document. Every page contained my father's initials. Witness signatures. A notarized seal. The attorney read quietly for several minutes before speaking. This document appears authentic. I could barely breathe. What does it say? He hesitated. It doesn't replace your father's original will. My stomach sank. It changes one important condition. He looked toward the window. Specifically regarding ownership of Morrison Commercial Holdings. Neither Mom nor I spoke. The company transfers to Ethan only if he remains in compliance with a fiduciary review required after Richard Morrison's death. What kind of review? I asked. The attorney adjusted his glasses. An independent forensic audit. I frowned. Dad wanted the company audited? Apparently. Why? He flipped another page. There is an attached handwritten explanation. He cleared his throat. If I ever suspect company assets are being used for personal gain, no beneficiary shall receive controlling ownership until a complete forensic accounting confirms all executive actions taken during the previous 5 years. 5 years. Exactly the period Ethan had served as executive vice president. I looked at my mother. She looked completely stunned. No one ever mentioned this, she whispered. The attorney nodded slowly. Because this document was never presented. How is that possible? It was hidden. But why would Dad hide it? He folded the papers carefully. I don't believe your father intended to hide it. His next sentence sent chills down my spine. I believe someone expected it would never be found. Neither of us needed him to say Ethan's name. It was already hanging silently between us. The audit began 2 weeks later. Ethan laughed when he heard about it. You seriously think Dad suspected me? He smiled with complete confidence. This is a waste of everyone's time. Publicly, he acted offended. Privately, something changed. Former employees suddenly stopped returning calls. One longtime accountant resigned without explanation. Company servers went offline for maintenance. Boxes of archived records were reported missing. The independent auditors weren't amused. Neither was the court supervising the estate. Every missing document raised another question. Every missing answer created another delay. For the first time since Dad died, Ethan stopped looking untouchable. But the pressure wasn't just on him. Neighbors began whispering. Friends picked sides. Business magazines published stories questioning the future of Morrison Commercial Holdings. Clients delayed contracts. Banks requested additional documentation. Even my own accounting firm started losing corporate referrals because people assumed I was somehow involved in the family dispute. One afternoon, I found myself sitting alone in my office after everyone else had gone home. I wondered whether searching for the truth had been worth destroying what little remained of my family. Then my phone rang. It was the lead forensic accountant. His voice was calm. Professional. But I immediately knew something had changed. Claire, he said, we've located a series of transactions we can't explain. My pulse quickened. What kind of transactions? There are millions of dollars involved. I gripped the edge of my desk. How many millions? There was a long pause before he answered. Enough to suggest this inheritance isn't the biggest financial story your family is about to uncover. Before I could ask another question, he added one sentence that made my blood run cold. And whoever moved that will wasn't trying to protect your father's wishes. They were trying to hide what happened before he died. That's when I realized the inheritance had never been the real secret. It was only the distraction. And the truth waiting beneath it was far more dangerous than anyone in my family had imagined. The forensic accountant's call changed everything. For months, I had believed this was a battle over fairness, over a father who had favored one child over another. I couldn't have been more wrong. The inheritance wasn't the story. It was the cover. 3 days later, our attorney called an emergency meeting. Present were my mother, Ethan, the lead forensic accountant, 2 attorneys representing the estate, and a retired judge appointed to oversee the probate dispute. The accountant opened a thick report. We've completed our preliminary review. Ethan leaned back confidently. I assume this clears everything up. No, the accountant replied. It raises substantially more questions. The room went silent. Over the previous 4 years, more than $9.3 million had been transferred through a web of consulting agreements, shell vendors, and inflated subcontractor invoices. None of the companies had actually performed the work they had been paid for. Every trail led back to one executive office. Ethan's. I object, Ethan snapped. These are legitimate business expenses. The accountant calmly slid another folder across the table. We thought so too. Inside were corporate emails, signed approvals, and digital audit logs. Every transaction had been authorized using Ethan's executive credentials. He looked at the documents, then at me. You set this up. I almost laughed. I wasn't even employed by the company. His confidence began to crack. Then came the real shock. The accountant projected one final document onto a screen. It was a letter my father had written 6 months before his stroke. I've noticed financial irregularities I cannot yet prove. If anything happens to me before the audit is completed, this codicil must be enforced immediately. No beneficiary should receive permanent control until the investigation is finished. Dad had known. He hadn't known everything. But he had known enough. My mother covered her mouth with both hands. Oh, Richard. The room was painfully quiet. Then Ethan stood. This is ridiculous. He slammed his chair backward. My father trusted me. The attorney answered before anyone else could. He trusted the audit. The judge immediately suspended Ethan's control over the company until the investigation concluded. Within days, banks froze several corporate accounts. State investigators requested financial records. Major clients postponed contracts. Former employees began contacting investigators voluntarily. One by one, they described a culture where questioning Ethan's decisions meant losing promotions, or losing your job. The pressure mounted quickly. A month later, one of Ethan's former financial managers agreed to cooperate. He admitted that Ethan had ordered employees to create fake consulting invoices to conceal personal investments that had gone badly. The money wasn't sitting in a secret offshore account. Most of it had already been lost. Luxury real estate. High-risk ventures. Private investment schemes. He had gambled with company assets while believing he could replace the money before anyone noticed. He never did. My father's suspicions had been justified. His hidden codicil hadn't been designed to punish me or Ethan. It had been designed to protect the company, and the hundreds of employees who depended on it. The estate court ruled several months later. Because Ethan violated his fiduciary responsibilities, he failed the condition required to inherit controlling ownership. The codicil became fully enforceable. Control of Morrison Commercial Holdings passed into a professionally managed family trust until restitution and restructuring were completed. The board unanimously asked me to serve as an independent trustee because of my accounting background and because I had never worked inside the company. I hesitated. I had spent months fighting my family. Now I was being asked to help save the business my father had built. Daniel squeezed my hand before the meeting. You've never wanted power. Exactly. That's probably why you're the right person. I accepted, with one condition. Every financial record would become fully transparent to the board. Annual independent audits would be mandatory. No executive, including me, would ever have unchecked authority again. The motion passed unanimously. It wasn't revenge. It was accountability. Months later, Ethan asked to meet me. We chose a quiet coffee shop overlooking Lake Washington. He looked older. Tired. Smaller somehow. I hated you, he admitted. I know. I thought Dad loved me more. I stared into my coffee. I think he loved us differently. Ethan nodded slowly. I kept trying to become the son I thought he wanted. And somewhere along the way, I became someone he'd never recognize. Neither of us cried. Neither of us hugged. Some wounds don't heal that way. Before leaving, he quietly slid an old photograph across the table. It showed the two of us as children building a treehouse with Dad. We were happy once, he said. Yeah. We really were. That was the last conversation we had for nearly a year. Mom eventually sold the big Bellevue house. It held too many memories. She moved into a smaller home closer to Lily's school and finally allowed herself to live without pretending everything was perfect. One Saturday afternoon, Lily asked me something I wasn't expecting. Mom? Yeah? Are you rich now? I smiled. No. But everybody says Grandpa's company is yours. I knelt beside her. It isn't mine. So whose is it? It belongs to everyone who works there. She thought about that. Is that why you still leave early every morning? It is. She wrapped her arms around me. I'm glad you didn't become mean. Neither was I. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see sitting in that attorney's office the day the first will was read. The greatest inheritance my father left behind wasn't money. It was the chance to decide what kind of person I wanted to become after betrayal. I could have spent years chasing revenge. Instead, I chose responsibility. Justice didn't erase the pain. It gave the pain a purpose. If this story teaches anything, it's this. Money can reveal character, but it rarely changes it. Secrets eventually surface. Power without accountability eventually collapses. And the people who quietly do the right thing, even when no one is watching, often inherit something far more valuable than wealth. They inherit peace.